Hey everyone, I'm super excited to have reached 10,000 subscribers. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please be sure to also click the bell to get notifications of new videos. It helps me out a ton. This video is for anyone wanting to create a Flipper Zero application. We'll look at examples that use ViewPort, ViewHolder, ViewStack, ViewDispatcher, SceneManager, and the VideoGameEngine. Choosing the technology that best matches your Flipper Zero application helps make development easier. Let's get started. In this video, I'm using Momentum firmware, which includes applications that use a variety of different technologies. Flipper Zero applications are written in C. However, you can go into Apps and then Scripts. And here you can write JavaScript that runs on the Flipper Zero. Likewise, you can go into Apps and Tools, and there's a MicroPython that allows you to write scripts written in MicroPython. And then backing out of there, there's one more option, which is BadKB or BadUSB. And this is a scripting language that allows your Flipper Zero to act as a keyboard. For the rest of this video, we'll be focused on C applications, and I'll go into Apps and then Games, and then we'll load up Snake 2.0. And so Snake 2.0 is an example of an application that uses a viewport. So a viewport has a method that calls for our draw and a method for our input. And so you can see here we have basically a single screen. And that screen is rendering content that can be dynamic. And this overlay is still in that same function that's getting called. So here they're keeping track of application state, and you can see that they know that the game over happened. And left and right is changing the settings. So this is still all in one screen. So left and right moves our snake when we're playing the game, and left and right changes between those setting values when we're making a setting. So if your application is a single screen that's doing custom drawing, ViewPort may be a good choice. For our next example, we'll go into Apps and then Media. And then inside of Media, we'll go down to Wave Player. To choose a file, they're using Dialogues app, in particular Dialog File Browser Show. But then once a file is selected, they're using a ViewHolder. The ViewHolder holds a single view, and in this case, that view is a custom view that's doing its own drawing and input. Not many applications use ViewHolder. Most applications that use views choose to use a ViewDispatcher instead of a ViewHolder. The big difference is instead of calling ViewDispatcher.run, your code is running instead, and you can see behind here, there's a while loop that's running forever, processing input messages and buffer messages and updating our UI. Another scenario where you may want to use a ViewHolder is if you have a console application that's mostly outputting to logs, but you want to show some minimal information on the Flipper Zero screen. For this next demo, I actually edited the code. So we'll go down to Tools, and then we'll go to Quack. And inside of Quack is Settings, and inside of Settings is an About screen. So I've modified this application to use a ViewStack. A ViewStack allows us to combine up to 3 views into a single view. So in this case, we're using the view, which is a pop-up, and the pop-up has an icon, a title, and some text. And then my second view in the ViewStack just draws a second icon. So this allowed our pop-up to now have visually 2 icons. So we have that rightmost quack that we're custom drawing. So a ViewStack is great if you already have a view, but you want to tweak the drawing or the input routines. The second view's draw code gets called after the first view, and the second view's input gets called before the first view. So you can override that input and say you've handled it, or you can draw after something else is already drawn. For the next example, we'll go into Apps, and then GPIO, and then Skeleton Sample Application. This application uses a ViewDispatcher, which allows for multiple views. Here we're using a variable item list view, and we're also using a text input view. This is a submenu view. This is a widget. And then this is a custom view that has both custom input and custom draw methods. For many applications, ViewDispatcher is a great choice since it allows you to have that submenu view with about, so people know how to use the application and how to contact you. It allows for other views such as configuration and then a view for your main application. For this next example, we'll go into Apps and then GPIO, and then we'll go down to Reader BioTinker. This application is using a SceneManager. Each scene uses a view. So here we're in the start scene and we're using a variable item list view. You can see in our variable item list, we're able to use left and right to change our values for our variable item list. And now we've gone into the USB UART scene. And this is using a custom view. And then switching to our USB UART config scene, we're again using a variable item list view. So SceneManager is great if your application uses the same view twice. And another thing that the SceneManager is good at is managing where the back button goes. So if there's multiple ways to get into a particular scene, the back button will keep going back to the previous scene. So your application doesn't have to manage where the back button goes. It takes a little bit getting used to views and scenes using a SceneManager. There's typically more code involved, but I find adding new features to a SceneManager app is typically a little easier than ViewDispatcher. For our last example, we'll go into Apps and then GPIO and then Flip World, and then go ahead and click play. This application is using the VideoGameEngine. Unfortunately, I think only Jay Blanked and myself have created games using the engine, so there aren't many examples or documentation. Hopefully next month I can create a tutorial for the VideoGameEngine. The basic idea is that you have a game. A game is made up of levels, and levels have entities, and those entities have behaviors like render and what to do on collision and what to do on input and that kind of stuff. The Air Arkanoid game that came out with the video game module is also a good application to look at. So again, if it's a custom UI and a single screen, probably ViewPort is a good solution. However, if later you're going to want text input, you may want to use a ViewDispatcher instead. Very few applications are currently using ViewHolder, but again, if you just had a simple console app that you wanted to add a little bit of UI to, then a ViewHolder may be a good solution for you. If your application just has one level deep navigation, I'd probably recommend that ViewDispatcher, unless you're using multiple of the same views, and in that case, I would recommend the SceneManager. Thanks again for watching the video. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to click that bell.